Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 27th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can find that easily anytime by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line at 472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska and click on the map for a really quick forecast that'll pop up at any part of Alaska that you're in, and it'll take you to your local weather forecast office all in one click. If you can't find what you're looking for, let us know at david.snider@noaa.gov. That's the easiest way to find me, and I'm happy to answer and serve you any way I possibly can. Help you get steered in the right direction with any of the National Weather Service products around Alaska. Let's take a look at what's going on across the region. No watches, warnings, or advisories to talk about tonight. We are seeing high pressure that's taking pretty good stronghold across most of the Gulf of Alaska. You can see the southerly winds pushing moisture up from the Pacific and over the Bering, Bristol Bay, and into the Alaska Range, and as well as southwestern Alaska and the middle Yukon Valley. Up north, weak high pressure moving up over the Chukchi coast. With that, some colder air trying to mass across the eastern parts of Asia and west of the Gulf of Anadyr. It's not going to make a whole lot of headway, but there is enough cold and enough moisture to keep periods of rain and snow across the north and the west as we go into the next several days. Clouds you see here across the western Aleutians are all preceding a deepening area of low pressure across the North Pacific and the western Bering Sea. That'll control the weather in the west as we get into Thursday and Friday, but not really make a big surge into the mainland of Alaska as we go into the next several days. In the meantime, pretty fair and warm weather will continue for southeastern Alaska. Dry conditions there thanks to the jet actually blowing from east to west across the northern Gulf. The main weather maker is well to our south, and we also have a ridge of high pressure across most of Alaska in the upper atmosphere. That's keeping things very dry and stable. And as you'll see in a few minutes, that looks to be the pattern not only for the rest of this week into next week, but maybe even the week after that. So very dry and warm conditions will prevail. Here's a look at the weather map now. At the surface, you see levels around 1,026 millibars or so across western British Columbia into the Yukon and the northern Gulf. Across southwestern Alaska and into the interior, levels there are just a little bit stronger. 1,030 millibars or just below it. Across the west, air is moving from south to north across the west coast, and we see those pockets of blue and green on there. That is rain and snow, and also areas of fog. The two lines there represent poor visibility. They're telling us that there is some fog closer to the ground around St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, down into the northern Bering. And up and over this is where we get some of that warmer weather that's being pushed from the west coast all the way up and over high pressure as air moves around in a clockwise fashion. We do have some pockets of low pressure here across south central and the western Gulf. And again, nothing really terribly strong there, so we're not talking about any developing system or anything, just that. Out across the west, though, we do have a wave of weather developing and strengthening. It's moving into the west coast at 949 millibars. This will bring up the wind sharply across the western chain tonight and certainly into Thursday and Friday. Ahead of that, as that reacts with a little bit of the moisture, we'll see some pockets of snow and snow showers across the central and western chain around the Pribilofs and into the western parts of Alaska, especially the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range around the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and westward into the Seward Peninsula. Areas of light snow may be possible around parts of southwest and the Alaska Range, and areas of light rain showers should be expected from the Kenai Peninsula southward toward Kodiak Island. Southeast looking pretty dry right now with high pressure still sitting over the Gulf. That should be the rule again on Thursday, and a weak disturbance stretches on the north and eastern side of that. You'll see more clouds in that region as well as a better chance for some light precipitation. And as you head into the interior, don't be surprised to run into some pockets of light snow from the Kotzebue Sound region all the way into, from the Kuskokwim Bay region all the way into the Alaska Range and northward into the middle Yukon Valley and westward the Kotzebue Sound area. Again, those areas of light snow should persist. The pressure gradient is going to tighten up a little bit more across the north slope and certainly offshore. With that, we expect to see areas of blowing snow along a frontal boundary that's trying to hold back some colder air. It doesn't look like it advances very much, all because of high pressure sitting across regions over the Northwest Territories and northern Yukon just west of Great Slave Lake. To the west, low pressure does not move very much. That center of circulation still west and south of the Aleutians. And you can see the front as it moves away from that low is moving closer and closer to the western Bering and passing over Adak and Atka. But as it goes, it is falling apart, getting away from its core strength that's still hovering out in the west. So we give it that dashed line effect, letting you know that it is slowly dying, a very slow and painful death. High pressure sitting south of Sand Point and southeast of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor at 1,029 millibars, also creating a pretty broad area of stable weather here and stable air. So this trough is not just going to plow into it. In fact, it's going to reinforce that southerly flow working through the central and western Bering Sea. Some moisture is making it inland, but it's mostly that very mild weather that we'll see, especially for southeast, where temperatures could push into the 50s and 60s. By Friday, we see high pressure that is still sitting across the Gulf and the North Pacific, just south of the Alaska Peninsula, around 1,034 millibars. We still have a very weak disturbance sitting across the Copper River Valley, parts of Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, all the way over Kodiak Island. And close to that at times, you'll see pockets of clouds and some snow showers. A better look at high pressure across the middle and upper Yukon Valley also gives us pretty stable weather. You'll be looking at generally dry conditions, plenty of afternoon sunshine, but clouds across the morning and maybe some pockets of snow for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys up around Red Dog Mine. Don't be surprised to run into a little bit of snow there, but a much better chance for precipitation and gustier winds the further west you go. And that could include areas as close as Nome to St. Matthew. St. Lawrence Island has a very good chance of seeing unsettled weather the next several days, and then out across eastern Asia, closer to that main quarter of south and westerly winds. A trough of low pressure will still sit across the western chain, and you can see the tight packing of the pressure gradient here. But remember, this is all southerly flow, and that all that means is warmer air is moving its way into the Arctic with no constraint on its path at all. High pressure is pretty much holding this entire area across the central, southwestern, and the Aleutian chain, as well as the Gulf of Alaska, and certainly southeast. So very dry, very mild conditions will be the rule going into the weekend. And like I said, probably the next week to come. Let's take a look at the temperatures as we go into tomorrow morning. Lower to mid-30s at least for most of southeast. Same goes for south central. A few areas in the outlying regions might be a little bit colder. South and west 20s and 30s there. 27 in Nome, 25 for Gamble, Savunga. Teens and 20s for the North Slope. Fort Yukon 26. Fairbanks around 28, Kodiak 38 degrees. High temperatures for your daytime tomorrow, 50s to maybe pushing 60 in southeast, 40s to about 50 for south central, 46 in Kodiak, 42 around Bethel, 32 in Nome, 26 for Utqiagvik, 25 around Kaktovik. Friday morning temperatures still above freezing in southeast, close to freezing in south central, southwest mid to upper 20s, Unalaska and Dutch Harbor 35, 17 for Bettles, 24 in Ambler, 27 in Nome, and 10 for Utqiagvik, with high temperatures Friday afternoon back in the mid to upper 50s for southeast at least, 50 around Cordova, 45 around Homer, and 46 in Kodiak, 38 for Fort Yukon. Ambler near 34, 19 for Utqiagvik, Shishmaref about 33, 32 in Nome, and Kodiak looking at temperatures near 46. The long-term trend toward April 10th, warmer for sure. Above average heat continues, especially for south, southeast, and southwest, and dry conditions prevail.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. With high pressure sitting out over the Gulf, you'll notice an offshore flow for most of southeast, keeping things VFR. But look for IFR to spread all the way from the Barren Islands into the Kenai Fjords region, outside of Prince William Sound and wrapping around into the Gulf. The general flow keeps that southerly wind and moisture moving up the west coast with frequent waves of weather moving in. But you'll notice that dissipates a lot as it moves into the interior, and there should be some widespread VFR in the morning for parts of the Tanana Valley, including the Fairbanks region. But surrounding that, especially over higher terrain, you'll get very broad areas of MVFR and IFR up through Kotzebue Sound. And the next low is already developing IFR along the frontal boundary, working along the western chain. You can see that spreads out a little bit more toward Thursday, including around St. Paul and St. George, all the way up into the Bering Strait and down the YK coastline. Marginal conditions will overtake most of south central Prince William Sound and the western interior and through the middle and upper Yukon valleys, and then stopping short of reaching perhaps all the way over Fairbanks and the Tanana Valley and ending before it reaches the Alcan border. Look for some periods of VFR for the North Slope. Make use of that from Utqiagvik all the way out toward Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik. Southeast still looking pretty good for Thursday afternoon. IFR conditions in the eastern Gulf. You can see a little bit of change there by Friday morning. Marginal conditions overtake the North Slope once again. A few pockets and holes there for VFR. South and west into the Bering Sea. Widespread IFR as the low pressure system is moving eastward. And as we get into Friday afternoon, you'll notice the front is kind of spreading a lot of that IFR a little bit further toward the west coast with some breaks in that across the west. Looks like most of the Gulf still under the influence of high pressure. We'll see some breaks in the marginal conditions, and southeast is still looking pretty good. Here's a look at your pass conditions for your Thursday now. AKwx and Adigan Pass will see some changes. We expect to see a little bit more of a higher ceiling, better visibility around Adigan Pass, so marginal weather there if you can pick. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, a little bit different. Lake Clark expected to be mainly IFR throughout the day, and some lean over toward marginal conditions for Merrill Pass as we go. Quite the opposite for Rainy Pass, expecting marginal conditions in the morning and then heading toward IFR as the afternoon goes on. Windy Pass, IFR conditions there by the afternoon, and we'll expect similar conditions for Isabel Pass, a little bit of a lowered ceiling as we get into the day. Mentasta Pass should go the opposite direction, heading for visual flight rule by the afternoon. Portage Pass Tenita Pass also looking to head over toward IFR as the afternoon goes on, much like some of the other Alaska Range passes. Portage Pass looking at IFR developing, and Chilkoot and White Pass, again, still looks pretty good. Here's a look at freezing levels, and you'll notice that high pressures push a lot of warm air into south central. Not quite as high in latitude as it was a couple days ago, but still notable that it is fairly warm out there. Also looking at some increased warmth across the central chain with the surface freezing line hugging St. Matthew and just south of Nunivak Island over Bristol Bay and Lake Iliamna and over south central and southeast. Icing potential is still running pretty high, anywhere from 5 to about 7,000 feet, with that southerly surge around the ridge of high pressure sitting over the central Gulf and most of the interior. Out west, everything you see there is an association with that low pressure system developing across the western Bering. Levels there up around 7,000 feet. The jet stream has the main corridor of fast moving air sitting out across the West Pacific and then jogging north hard across the Arctic and over the North Slope, running around 100 to 110 knots. High pressure across British Columbia and the Yukon, sending in an easterly flow up over southeastern Alaska, keeping things dry there. And just below that, the Pacific jet stream, 55 to 85 knots there, keeping most of the active weather out of range of Alaska. So underneath that, at 9,000 feet, we have our high pressure ridge over the Gulf, a general west and southwesterly flow into the interior and off the Pacific. Wind speeds slow dramatically from 50 to about 85 knots to about 20 to 25 over the interior, a general westerly flow moving through. And you can see the next low there barely showing up on the map out in the west, a little bit more predominant there at 3,000 feet. Wind speeds out in the western chain already 65 to 75 knots. Two areas of high pressure, but the general flow is still west and southwesterly into the interior, and about 10 to 15 knots or so. Coastal areas a little bit faster around Prince William Sound, and still some light and variable winds over southeast. So as far as turbulence goes, we're looking at some main considerations for thumps and bumps, generally in the western half of the Brooks Range. Considerable moderate will be the most likely signal there. Probably west of Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass all the way out toward the Kobuk and Noatak valleys to about Red Dog Mine, and then southward into the northern end of Kotzebue Sound to Point Hope, probably the most significant area where you see a little bit more of a bump or two. And out across the western chain below 4,000 feet, with those winds picking up around the developing gale and then eventually a storm force low, maybe stronger out in the west, below 4,000 feet for considerable moderate. It's a pretty good guess. We'll be back with a little bit more weather in just a few.
Can be many miles long, from 1 to 100 feet high, traveling at 400 miles per hour. This ocean monster is known as a tsunami, and it can wreak havoc on coastal populations and landscapes. A tsunami is a series of ocean waves caused by any large and sudden disturbance of the sea surface. Tsunamis can be generated by landslides, volcanic eruptions, or even meteorite impacts in the ocean, but they are most often caused by an earthquake where there's a sudden displacement of the ocean floor. When that happens, there's a transfer of energy from the sea floor to the ocean, causing waves on the surface to radiate outward in all directions. In deep waters, these waves may not even be detectable. But when the tsunami enters shallower waters, the wave speed slows and its height increases. The water along the coast may recede noticeably. A large wall of turbulent water, called a bore, may also form. When the tsunami hits, it may come ashore like a fast-rising flood and strike with devastating force. The series of waves may continue for hours. The first one may not be the last or the largest. For your safety, know the potential warning signs of an incoming tsunami. A strong earthquake that causes difficulty standing. a rapid rise or fall of the water along the coast, a loud ocean roar. When you're in a coastal area, it's important to keep alert for messages from local officials, such as lifeguards, police, the U.S. Tsunami Warning Centers, and NOAA All Hazards Radio. If you find yourself in a location of a tsunami strike, here's what you need to do to stay safe. Keep calm. Walk or run to higher ground, 100 feet above sea level or 1 mile inland. Do not drive. Keep roads open for emergency vehicles. If you cannot move to higher ground, use the stairs to get to the 3rd floor or higher in a sturdy building. Follow all instructions from local officials and stay out of coastal areas until authorities issue an all clear. Tsunamis can strike any coastline in the world and can affect locations thousands of miles away from where they formed. They may be uncommon, but the devastation they cause makes them a deadly force in nature. For more information on tsunamis, go to the following sites.
Tsunami, a killer wave, speeding across the ocean at 400 miles an hour. It smashes into land, destroying everything in its path. Tsunamis do not have a season, but they can strike any coast at any time. If one forms close to the shore, the shaking of the earth and a loud roar may warn of its approach. But when a tsunami forms across the ocean, it can take hours to reach the shore, enough time to warn people to move to higher land. Over the past 20 years, NOAA has developed DART, a real-time monitoring system that provides data for forecasting tsunamis. The DART systems have been deployed in earthquake-prone areas throughout the ocean, including the Pacific and Indian basins. A DART system combines a surface buoy and a sensor on the ocean floor. This sensor detects changes in water pressure and seismic activity and transmits the data back to the surface. If these changes indicate a tsunami may form, the buoy signals an alert via satellite to the tsunami warning centers in Alaska and Hawaii. Back at the centers, scientists plug the data into pre-existing models. These models predict the height, the arrival time, and the coastal locations that the tsunami will hit. Watches and warnings are issued to the affected communities so preparations can begin. Today, 47 DART stations are positioned all around the world, ready to detect and warn coastal communities about the next potential tsunami. With the DART system and tsunami warning centers in place, we are now better prepared to predict a killer wave before it strikes.
December 26, 2004. What began as an undersea earthquake in the Indian Ocean ended as the most deadly tsunami in recorded history, with nearly 240,000 lives lost. This was a devastating wake-up call to coastal communities and tsunami research. Prior to this event, only 6 of NOAA's Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunami, or DART, buoys were in place. Scientists could only predict tsunami arrival times, not flood potential. And there was not a global tsunami warning system. Today, 10 years later, we can tell a different story. U.S. and international coastlines are far better prepared for such a catastrophe, Thanks in large part to research and technology developed at the NOAA Center for Tsunami Research at Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory. NOAA's DART array is now complete, with 39 buoys operated by the National Weather Service's National Data Buoy Center. Along with 21 international buoys, this array can measure a tsunami wave as small as 1 centimeter in the open ocean and provide these data in real time to forecast when a tsunami may hit the coast and how much flooding there will be. NOAA scientists and engineers are currently testing the 4th-generation DART buoy that will be able to measure local tsunamis as well as distant ones. Flooding forecast models incorporate local topography and historical tsunami data in order to more accurately predict exactly how a tsunami might behave when it reaches shore. NOAA has 75 site-specific models that can provide high-resolution flooding forecasts for effective response and mitigation during a tsunami event. NOAA has gathered data from every tsunami since 2004 to improve its forecast models. Today, it operates the world's only real-time tsunami flooding forecast system using DART data to accurately compute flooding forecasts. The NOAA Tsunami Warning Centers make tsunami data available on the internet and issue advisories, watches, and warnings through the Emergency Alert System and via NOAA weather radios. While it is impossible to prevent a tsunami, we are now much better prepared to detect them and predict their paths and impacts, so those in coastal communities can take the steps necessary to safely protect themselves.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to your sea ice edge now, you can see with the southerly winds working over the northern Bering now, we've lost a lot of high concentration ice around the Yukon Delta to Eetolen Strait north of Nunivak Island and into Norton Sound. We'll continue to see a lot of that ice moving northward as the ice edge recedes. The other big important thing today is that the sea ice outlook for the spring has been released. If you go to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, with that website there, you can get the May outlook and the expectations, which can be quickly summarized in things have been unusual this winter. The sea ice edge and the main ice pack, again, will be one of the question marks, especially across the Chukchi Sea and into the Beaufort as we go into the summer. And certainly read more about that and what the Alaska Sea Ice Program thinks is to be expected as we go into the early summer months. Let's take a look at southeast now. Northerly winds will be fairly light with high pressure in place across the inside passage, only 2 to 3 foot seas. Seas on the outer coast about 8 to 6 feet as you head up to the north. So the highest down south actually around 9 feet near the Dixon entrance, 6 feet up around Yakutat with that north and westerly flow. For Friday, northerlies remain light on the inside, 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas there and 6 to 7 foot seas for most of the outer coast. Well, even lower there as you get closer to Prince William Sound and Icy Cape, 4 to 5 foot seas as you approach Yakutat. For Prince William Sound, light winds, a southerly flow, 10 knots, 2 foot seas, 3 to 4 foot seas across the north and western Gulf, looking at 10 to 15 knot winds there. Southeasterly flow over the Barrens and light southerly winds coming up Cook Inlet, anywhere from 2 to 4 foot seas on Thursday. 10 knots lightly from the west as we get into your Friday there with 2 to 3 foot seas through Cook Inlet. Look for slightly higher seas across the north and western Gulf, but not in any sizable fashion there. 2 foot seas inside of Prince William Sound and light winds from the west should be expected as we wrap up the week. For Shelikof Strait, a light northwesterly flow coming into Kodiak Island there with a 2 foot sea. Southerlies on the other side, 15 knots and 5 foot seas. 5 foot seas also extend down the Alaska Peninsula coastline with light winds from the north and west. Look for a light southeasterly flow coming off of Cold Bay in the Alaska Peninsula. A 6 foot sea there, northwesterlies and 4 foot seas inside of Bristol Bay for Thursday. For Friday, not much of a change. A north and easterly flow wrapping into high pressure here across the Bering Sea coast. 3 to 6 foot seas. Seas coming up down the peninsula arm there. And northeasterly winds very lightly blowing across Kodiak Island and down the Alaska Peninsula Pacific coastline, expecting about 2 to 9 foot seas there, the highest of which will be south of Sand Point. For the Aleutian chain, light southerly winds for the central and eastern chain, but you'll notice a quick increase in that Wind anywhere from 30 to about 40 knots there, coming in from the south, 8 to 18-foot seas between Nikolsky and Atka and Adak. And then once you get west of Adak, 29 to 34-foot seas with 30 to 40-knot winds on Thursday. That diminishes just a little bit on Friday, but you're still looking at a strong southeasterly flow coming in. Southerlies extend all the way into the Bering Sea and much warmer weather there. The highest seas move offshore and west of Shemya, but you're looking at 16 to 24-foot seas on the Pacific coast and 9 to as high as 29-foot seas there throughout the Bering as you get into your Friday. For the west coast, you're looking at generally southerly winds again, gradually chewing away at that ice edge and moving it northward. Look for 5 to 6-foot seas along the coast from the Kuskokwim Delta into areas near the ice edge, 8 to 9-foot seas from St. Paul to St. George and St. Matthew, 20 to 25 knots there from the south. By Friday, a southerly wind continues. Winds come up to about 30 knots. Expect 14 to 19-foot seas and about 7 to 10-foot seas on either side of Nunivak Island around Macoriak. Expect a 10-foot seas, 7-foot seas into the Kuskokwim Delta region. For the North Slope, a southerly wind still blowing over the ice will keep things fairly mild. 25 knots expected there, 20 to 25 knots from the south and west for most of the Beaufort Seacoast over the ice. For Friday, a little bit of a southeasterly shift blowing out of Kotzebue Sound, 20 to 25 knots. And westerlies working over the Beaufort Sea, 25 knots for all regions there as you head through Friday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, it does look like it is going to be a generally dry and mild pattern for most of Alaska. Now, what we're seeing over the course of the last few days is the possibility for light precipitation, rain and snow across the west coast and over the higher terrain. But what we're seeing in reality is a very small area where that's actually happening. So these are the areas that it is possible, of course. A stronger weather front's moving across the western chain and the western Bering Sea as we get into Thursday and Friday. That will keep strong southerly winds across the chain, really focusing the worst of that further out west of Kiska and Shemya, but that's going to keep most of the state fairly mild and dry with high pressure across the region. We will see some passing areas of rain and snow reach the west coast, and that will keep the seas fairly choppy out across the west coast as well, and occasional rounds of turbulence. But watch for some morning IFR and a widespread MBFR across the Gulf and closer to those centers of circulation as we go throughout the rest of the week. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you again right here tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.